Alright guys, we're back. The Gantry build. So, just like before, get all your parts and count them out. I've already done a couple wheels so that I don't have to redo them every single time. I like to do them all at once. Let's go ahead and start. Aluminum plates over here, a few little plastic parts. You're going to need all of the M5x35s, couple frame, couple little T-nuts, 12 washers or so. Actually, -4 because we already have them installed in here. Alright, so as before, all your wheels, push it in, drop the washer, push the next bearing in, wheels are done. Alright. Okay, so step 1, attach gantry plate, flat part toward end of shorter. Okay, so how we're starting this guy is the shorter of the two 2020 extrusions. So what we're talking about doing is attaching the gantry plate like so. In order to do that, use these M5x10s with a washer. The washer's there because you will drop into the frame, so we don't want to do that. There's a few different ways you can approach this. I like to take the M5x10s and put the T-nut on there and then slide it through like so. That's a pretty fast way to go about it, so I'm going to do that. You can also slide the T-nuts in and try to hit them with the bolts, but to me this is fastest. Alright, throw them in the plate. Make sure you get your washers. Add your T-nuts. Another T-nut. And it shouldn't matter which end at this point. It's all identical. You can often take the back of the T-nut and just hold the flat part to make it a little faster. To keep them positioned properly. Of course, this is easier said than done. Now it's also important that you position this with this point facing inward. And then you don't have to crank these down, but you want them kind of tight. I would also recommend having this T-nut, the very back one, just barely hanging out. Just barely. Just kind of tighten them up a little. Keep them snug. We'll probably have to adjust these in the future in about 5 minutes. Alright. So that's step 1. Step 2 is to do your V-wheels. Step 3 is you're taking 4 of these M5x35s and you are going through the plate in this direction. Now if you noticed, these back ones are slotted. If you guys have noticed that, but in your plates, these are like oval slightly, and that allows this to play back and forth. That's what adjusts the tension on your wheels against your rails. Next step, 1/4 inch spacers. Need 4 of those guys. Put your wheels in. Another set of 1/4 inch spacers. Aha, right? This is gantry support plate. Now this is important. You notice these were slotted, right? Well, this backside is also slotted. Those are important that they go slotted with the slotted. That way the entire bolt can play back and forth here. Probably should have mentioned that somewhere in the manual. I might have, but I'm getting it now. That just keeps minimal play in the system. Okay, then you're throwing on your M5 nuts. Alright, next step. through. Next step is, maybe I skipped a step. Well, either way, the next thing you're doing is Z-clamp. So you're going to take these guys, and I think you have to put a washer on first on 2 of these M5 by 35s. Put a washer on each one. Then come the Z-nut clamps. So it's really important that you go from the back through, and then you're going to do the other one. Make sure these are mirrored, like so. Should slide through without too much difficulty. This guy's next. There is no washer here. Then the next thing you're going to do is add T-nuts onto here. And this guy, add a T-nut. Send them on through. Make sure you get the flat side of the T-nut. Send it in there. You can loosely tighten this. Loosely tighten? Yeah, loosely tighten. This will sit pretty far. I do know that the motor, when it sits on here, it should almost be pointed with just a little bit of a gap between the edge of the shaft and the edge of this plate. It should roughly be, that's about right. But this will have to be adjusted down the road. What's most important is that, oh, this isn't done yet. I'm sorry, guys. I believe the motor goes on to the plate first. Yeah. Okay, yeah, we got to throw on the motor plate. So you've got this plate here. I was just showing you how it will go together in the future. Yeah. So you've got this motor, and you want, this is down, if you guys can see that. You want the clip for the electronics of the motor to go down. And just to verify, this piece goes up into here like that. So that way you know what down is on this. You're going to take all 4 of these guys, and just run through the plate into the motor. You can usually get them started by hand, or use your M3. If you use a drill, be really cautious. Use a drill and a bit, because as you're going, if drills have a lot of torque, it can rip this thing around, and metal hurts at high speeds when it hits your knuckles. Alright, so we are getting the rest of these guys in here. It's all 4 of them. You probably want to go ahead and tighten these up. You don't over tighten them. Just get the snugness, you know, get them good and snug. All right, they feel good. All right, next thing, I believe we need to put our pulley on right now. We're gonna get to that belt here in a minute. You're gonna need one of your pulleys and your other hex key. This guy just goes on like it normally would. You probably want to put these set screws towards the flat side, or at least one of them towards the flat side. That may have to be adjusted in a minute. Alright, so here's where we're at. We're also attaching this guy. These guys may have to be pushed in while you drop that in. Drop that in. T-nuts. Come on, T-nuts. There they go. Alright, so it should look about like this. Then you're going to take your brass Z-coupling. Z-coupling. These guys drop in from above. These are M3 by 16s, I believe. There's a few ways to, this is called what I call crash prevention in a previous video, where the idea of it is that the Z-coupling can come off of these bolts. If you don't want it to, then you can add, if you're homing and this thing drops and the nozzle hits the bed, this thing will slip right off of there. But you have to have something so that this thing doesn't rotate. So you can either come up from underneath so that it won't slip off for drilling, milling. But if you're 3D printing, I recommend coming in from the top, at least to start with. And you can adjust how much grab these have by the distance that they go into this block. For the most part, I think you can go ahead and seat them all the way down though. You should be in good shape. These don't really have any torque that is placed on them. They're just there to prevent this brass fitting from rotating. Just holders. Okay, brass fitting could fall out like that. All right, the last step is going to be this guy. But first, now this is important. What we're going to do is we're going to cut the belt and install the carriage before we put on the end. And in order to do this, we're going to wrap the belt around. So we may put a pause at this video right here. Time to cut the belt. So this belt is not pre-cut. I didn't want to have to go through all the packages. We were already kind of a little bit behind on production. I just wanted to get these guys out to you. This belt needs to be, let's see, what was that belt length? I thought it had to be 400. No, this is the long one. This is like an 800 millimeter belt, or maybe 1,000 millimeters. I don't recall how long. 800. Okay, it's written in the manual. 800 millimeter GT2 belt. So roughly, in theory, it should be something like that long. Let's give it a little extra just for the fun of it. Okay, that's 800 millimeters right there. Go ahead and a pair of scissors or something. I'll have a pair in my reach so these will work. Set the rest of the belt aside. This is the long belt. The other one's much shorter than this, only like 400 millimeters. So you are going to have some spare belt. Okay, what you have to do is with your carriage, take the belt, put the two ends of the belt together like that. Make sure there's no twists in it. Take this guy, open up this belt block screw, belt block bolt, and just stick it in there with you know, 10 to 20 millimeters of belt hanging out the top. Be about ½ inch or so for imperial fellows. Yeah, just make sure those teeth are lined up properly. This would be a disaster if you had a twist in the belt. Shouldn't be as tricky as I'm making it look. Alright, there we go. So you got about a little less than an inch, something like that. Tighten it back up there. Doesn't have to be super tight, just enough to make it snug. Alright, here's the trick. Make sure your belt doesn't have any loops in it. This guy's sitting like this. We're going to loop the belt, go into the belt behind it, or just simply loop the belt behind the motor like that. Now if we have this long enough, you should be able to position, I don't know if you guys are able to see this so well, if you can see it. see what I just did. I'll flip it around backwards so you can see the back side. So you will make sure the belt stays in its spot and slip. Hopefully you can slip this through. Now if you can't, that probably means that this is too tight. This wheel, when we tighten those up, it was up kind of high and got locked in place. Okay, so if you'll notice, make sure I got a good clear picture here. If you'll notice, the belt runs out here, and I've just brought it in between these two wheels. You need to grab this belt here, the back side, and just keep pulling the bottom of it. And what you're doing is wrapping the belt around the back of the motor here as you're pulling. That's all there is to it. Kind of seems complex, and it kind of is, but once you get it moving, it's done. It goes pretty fast. All right, the last thing that we need to do is build the retaining X-belt bearing pulley assembly thingy. Okay, you'll notice that there are two holes close together in the long bearing holder, and there's one further out. Put the M5 by 35 through that long one. Screw on one nut, M5 nut, a second M5 nut. You might want to go ahead and tighten these down as you go, just so that they're snug. There's no gap, there's no play. Two more M5 nuts. Snug it down, just to be safe. Snug it down. Okay, next thing we're going to do is a washer on each of these M5 by 10s. Send these guys through like that. Alright. And T-nut. T-nut. Okay, there's a few different ways to do this, but some ways are a little bit trickier than others. Go ahead and slide it into the back so that you have something that looks like this. The next thing I would do, kind of hold the belt out of the way for a second. I would get this T-nut in position in here first, because that can be tricky to get in there later. Alright, T-nut's in. Now we got this plate to put on. So this plate consists of an M5 by 10 going through this into that T-nut. This also going over here. I think the belt should reach around at the moment. Yeah, it should reach around. As long as your belt is long enough, you cut it long enough that it reaches. Start by getting this M5 by 10 into that T-nut that we placed in the frame, because that's the hardest part. M5 nut. Oh, almost missed it. Put this guy on first, and then do your M5 nut. Okay, this little lever is to adjust the X limit switch. Also want to kind of get these a little snug. Okay, and then you also want as much travel as you can with this carriage. So one thing you want to definitely do is get this guy moved out as far as you can without it being unstable. So it's, without accidentally slipping these off, You should see the T-nuts come out of the end of this just a tiny bit, but it would probably don't want to let the actual bolts come out of the end at all. So you can't see any thread of the bolts. Tighten those 3 back up. And there you have it. So this belt should just ride on the bearing. It's important that this isn't tilted back or forward, otherwise this belt could slip sideways and start rubbing. And you're probably going to get some rubbing here, but it's alright. It can withstand quite a bit. The final part is to the limit switch, since it's further out, and that was the only place we could solve a quick way to put it. You have to have a little lever. So take this M3x16, send it through that plastic arm, X-limit brace, I think it's called. Okay. And I think you'll only have to have one, but I included 2 because if you mount this limit switch on the laser setup or the mill setup that I have, it requires that the brace is placed flipped around against the flat part, and it just changes the dynamic of it, and I had to put on a second little nut to make sure that it was working correctly. So anyhow, it's not that important to put the second one on, but whatever. Alright, so this is the gantry. We talked about how this is the carriage on its own, and the carriage plus this distended arm makes up the gantry. Still got some play in there. That play is then removed by, there's a few things you could do. This has to be centered on this guy. These can be moved out. You can maybe gain another millimeter or 2, but don't sacrifice the stability of these plates simply to gain 1 millimeter, because it's not often that you need all that room when you're 3D printing. Most of the time you just need exactly what you need, and that's it. I mean, not many 3D prints are actually an entire plate worth of room. You can push these together and kind of tighten this up a little bit if you want. We'll go back through and retighten and get the wheels properly tightened at the very end of the assembly. But for the most part, it should be fairly snug. Ooh, looks like I missed that. Don't do that. Learning stuff all the time. So make sure your belt goes around your belt here, probably before tightening this up here. Not like I did. Okay, so if it's there, then pull, then tighten. And that's how we're basically tensioning our belt. I'm sure there's better ways out there. Maybe you guys can come up with some, but this is pretty darn effective, and it's pretty simple. So we're running with it. Alright guys, that is the gantry carriage assembly. Up next, I believe we're tackling the table, or we might do the frame. I guess we'll find out. And that's it.